So, a couple weeks ago I posted some pictures of my latest toy, and that is the Bridge City HP-9 dual angle or dual bevel block plane. Here it is. I'll post some actual photographs for this video. But I thought I'd do sort of a dump of what I've learned for the last couple of weeks about this particular plane. There really aren't any reviews on YouTube of it. There's one or two quickie demonstrations, and there's a lot to say about it. First, I just want to repeat a story that John Ergonomics of Bridge City tells about himself. And the story goes, paraphrasing, something like this. He'll be at a show. I bet this story, by the way, is played out a bunch of times. He'll be at a show with some expensive planes, and somebody will come up to him and point to one of his planes and says, does that plane better than plane X, let's say some Lee Nielsen plane? And Ergonomics will say, not necessarily. And then the person will say, well then, why should I pay that much money for that plane? And John will say, well then you should. And that'll be the end of the conversation. You get the feeling that he loves what he does, and that he loves the challenge of different designs, both aesthetically different. This is certainly aesthetically different, as well as different from an engineering standpoint. So the first thing that people always talk about this particular plane is how different the look is. It's skeletonized so that the body is aluminum with the cutouts, which actually he's done several planes in a similar look. The original version of this was the CT-17. And the main difference between the CT-17 and the HP-9 is the CT-17 was all stainless steel. This has an aluminum anodized aluminum body, obviously some stainless steel sole and other parts, but it's very similar to the CT-17. It's a lot cheaper, although you wouldn't call it cheap, but by Bridge City standards perhaps it is inexpensive. I loved it. I wanted one. Went on their website, and they have several different categories. They have tools that are in production, tools that are in stock for sale, tools that are discontinued. That's the majority of their tools. They make a run, then when the run is done, that's it. And then some tools that they revisit and will do again and again, and you can click on their website and say, hey, if you're going to make more, I want one of those. That's what I did. I waited about a month. And I emailed him. I said, do you know when you're going to make this again? I put myself on the list, and I got the message that we really don't know. When we get enough requests, we'll revisit that. So life is short, and I don't want to wait forever. So I was able to find one, unused, but new. I mean, it was used, but untouched. So from a visual standpoint, it's very different. It's actually a very large block plane. The sole is a spec like a 6 1/8 inch, so it's over 6 inches. This is a big block plane. This is not a little block plane to hold with one hand. You'd have to have a pretty big hand to control this with one hand. So I use two hands. The other thing that struck people so significantly different about this plane was the cantilevered lockdown system. I open it like that. Open the whole thing up, and see it like that, close it, lock it with the palm of your hand, with a nice click. I'm not an engineer. That's not true. I was a software engineer, but I wasn't a real engineer, and so I haven't a clue about how this cantilever works, but it is a very cool mechanism that got a lot of attention. Let's talk about the basics of the plane. So that's the lockdown system. The adjuster is a Norris style adjuster, meaning that it adjusts both the depth of cut, and you can make a lateral adjustment with this. The interesting thing is that even John Ergonomics, and pretty much everybody who uses this tool, says It's much easier to make the adjustment of the plane with your fingers, particularly because there's a hole right there where you can put your fingers on the plane and make really micro adjustments. The mouth opening, very, very basic. Unscrew, move, screw, pretty traditional. Nothing sophisticated about that. The CT-17, that was one difference. That had a cam lock, which was kind of cool looking. One of the other things that Bridge City hypes a little bit, but I found it's legitimate, is the blade. The blade they use is an A2, and they say it comes optically lapped. The back is optically lapped, and they even tell you, don't lap it on a stone. You'll never get it as bright and shiny as we got it. And they're right. This thing came like an absolute mirror. Never saw a blade like that before. And I always think I can get kind of a mirror shine, but nothing like that. So they basically encourage you, don't lap it on a stone. If you need to take a burr off when you're sharpening or honing the blade, use a strop. Just use a strop and strop the burr off. Now, one of the things, this is all going to be not positive, negative, whatever. It's difficult to take the blade out, but you get used to it. You pop it open the mechanism. I'm not going to do the whole thing. And then you turn it over until the blade, you kind of shake the blade out. And that's how that works. Again, negotiating the blade back in is a little bit tricky. It's just different. It's a different methodology than most planes that you're going to have, and so it is, it's a little tricky. Now, what this blade has is a double bevel. Let me see what we can show on that. So they've got two different bevel angles. I suppose that was supposed to replace either two block planes, or at least one block plane where you bought two different blades. And I think it was just a clever bit of engineering. What they've done is they've put a magnet, the orange thing is a magnet, onto the back of the bevel that you're not using. And that way when you take the blade out and you're honing it on your stone, you're not exposed to an exposed blade in the back. However, the negative part of that is, while it looks cool and it's a cute and clever way, the magnet is not strong enough to hold the guard consistently. So it's very easy to bump the guard just slightly and shift it or even knock it off. So usually I've gotten used to it. I just hold the blade sort of in the middle and not back where the guard is and hone that way. Speaking about honing, I might as well talk about this now. The blade comes very sharp. However, there is something about the nature of this tool. My friend Jim Hendricks says it's a surgical instrument, and that's a good description. And part of it being a surgical instrument is you have to hone the blade as best as your honing sharpening skills can get it. It makes a difference. Just sharp is not good enough. The difference between having this blade honed really well and just relatively sharp is extraordinary. It is a surgical instrument. So I hone it, when I'm using it, I'll hone it daily. I'll just hit it on my finer stones, just take a couple minutes to give it both blades, both sides, both bevels, a quick hone. Otherwise, even though it doesn't feel dull, after I've used it for an hour or so, or a couple hours, I'll notice it's not cutting quite as well. But there's two adjustments that are very important. One is the blade retention adjustment. And that is here, and that is done with an Allen wrench. You basically loosen or tighten with the Allen. That mechanism is very easy to use, but setting it up is not that easy. The manual that comes with this, and it's a pretty extensive manual for a plane, at least a Bridge City plane, it's a 6-page manual. It takes about a page to describe the best way to set this up. But the reality is, if you follow their directions, it's not tight enough. And I thought at first I was crazy, I didn't know what was going on. So I contacted a couple of people who had the plane, and I said, you know, it's just not planing very well. It feels like it's not tight enough. And they confirmed that, yeah, you got to tighten it up more. So, being slightly anal, I emailed John Economaki, and he was kind enough to exchange a couple of emails with me. And I asked him, you know, here's my experience. If you don't tighten the mechanism enough, the plane potentially will skate a little bit, and the blade will laterally shift. So he said, yeah, tighten it up until it stops shifting, but no tighter. In other words, you can keep tightening it until the mechanism won't even open. You don't want to tighten it that much. I tighten it just to the point where I don't have a blade problem. Now, it took me about a week to figure this all out. Maybe I'm slow, but between figuring out with my own experimentation and the emails with a couple of people, and then actually going to the trouble, and he was very kind to answer me about a plane that, after all, is not even in production. He's not making any money off of me, to tell me how to use it. So, if you happen to score this kind of plane, use the manual as a beginning point, but in all likelihood, you'll have to tighten that mechanism. The reason it's confusing is because a bevel up block plane does not need a lot of pressure on the blade to get the plane to work and cut shavings. Where it does need pressure is to hold the blade so the blade doesn't do what I described, shift. So that's why you need extra pressure on the blade. But it's easy to do, and the mechanism is easy to turn. But occasionally I'll have to give it a little tweak if it's loosened just slightly. The other mechanism, and this is harder to show you, that you have to adjust is, there's a ring here. I don't know if we can get it to be seen, but this ring, which again works with a hex nut, is the Norris adjuster's adjustment for eliminating or reducing, I don't want to say eliminating, backlash. Like most plane adjusters, this can backlash and the blade will back off a little bit. There's two nuts here in this, what looks like a brass ring. And if you tighten them, you can tighten them easily to the point where the adjuster doesn't move at all. It's just locked. So obviously you don't want to tighten it that much. I found that my best position, and anybody who owns this plane, please tell me what your experience is a little short of that. I tighten it up so that the adjuster still turns, but it doesn't turn with a lot of play. And that, A, reduces backlash, and B, it just seems overall to plane better with the adjuster tightened. I tried to loosen it, and I didn't like the effect at all, but that's been my experience. But so far, unlike the lockdown mechanism, that's an adjustment I've made and then I leave alone. Now, what do you get from all this? On one hand, as I said, it's big. So the average idea of a small block plane that you hold in one hand and you make a couple of cuts, it's not quite that way. You're going to put two hands on it in all likelihood, unless you've got a really big hand. But it's actually very ergonomic. Somebody said to me, one of the things that he liked was the fact there were lots of ways to hold it, and there are. Typically, you're going to put the right palm on here. Now, I like to put my right finger, my index finger, on the blade retention screw thing. It just happens to fit my personal finger great. You've also got these holes. I don't know if that's how they were designed, but it's easy for me to put my thumb and my middle finger there. So sometimes I like to do it that way. And then here I either grab the knob, or I might simply put my thumb onto the front. So let's dial it in just a tiny bit. The Norris adjuster is extremely fine. I think it was 72 or 73 threads per turn or per inch, or anyway, it's very fine. So you can turn it pretty good and it will advance the blade just a tiny bit. But that tiny bit makes a big difference. There's one phenomena about this plane that it's hard to describe, but this shows my mental illness. But you'll get curly shavings, and sometimes the shaving will come out of this side hole. It'll come out like it's reminds me of the snake popping through the hole in Raiders of the Lost Ark, and it'll happen every 5 or 10 minutes, and somehow I get delighted over it. These holes are for the depth skids, but the shaving will curl up so tight it'll actually pop laterally at the hole, and I'll just go, wow. Now, you can set up the plane to take a heavier shaving if you want. Jim Hendricks described it, as I said, as a surgical precision instrument. But if you want to take a thicker cut, you absolutely can do it. But I would say that's not the strength of the plane. It will do all the standard things that you want a block plane for, end grain or chamfers or those sorts of things. But it also is big enough to be a small smoothing plane. And at that, it will take an unbelievably smooth flat cut. I've tried to compare it to the few smoothing planes that I have, and you know, I can't get those smoothers as smooth as this. Now, I can make the case that personally is not super important to me, because in most cases I'm going to rough up a surface anyway with sandpaper to finish, but it is a cool feeling to feel something that is very, very smooth, and more importantly to me, very flat. I mean, it's so, since I do mostly Luthier and work with small pieces, I'm guessing I'm going to use this a lot as a small smoother. Now, the one thing that John Economaki did tell me is while you could advance the cut while the blade is under tension, he encouraged me not to retract the blade while it's under tension. That if you want to retract the blade, you should pop this open, take the tension off the system, retract the blade, close it, then advance the blade slightly till the mechanism tightens. So,